process that we have now, one of the things it does is it can cause somebody who's got support from fewer Americans to become the president, like what has happened 4 times in history. Well, it happened with Andrew Jackson, too. It happened 3 times since the Civil War, but also Andrew Jackson got more popular votes than Quincy Adams, but Quincy Adams won the Electoral College.
By the way, who are the other ones?
Samuel Tilden got more popular votes than Rutherford B. Hayes. And
Benjamin Harrison beat Grover Cleveland.
And of course, George W.
It's helped Republicans in the 3 times since the Civil War.
We planned it that way.
I know. I think that's why.
It's all a great conspiracy, don't you know?
So one of the problems is that you can end up with a president who's got less popular support, and I think that is a problem. Another problem is that states that are clearly going to go one way or the other are not battleground states and get no attention during an election because there's no point in spending any money at all in Texas or California because everybody knows how they're going to vote, and it doesn't matter if you get more Democratic votes in Texas, it's never going to be enough. So the Democratic Party doesn't spend any money trying to turn out the vote in Texas. The candidates never go there. They go to the swing states, which are going to be Florida, Ohio. Lately it's been Colorado. So they go to swing states, but then you overvalue the issues in those swing states. It's one of the reasons why everybody opposes relations with Cuba, because they're trying to court the Cuban vote in South Florida. It's one of the reasons every candidate says, oh yeah, I'm in favor of ethanol for fuel, because Iowa is a swing state, even though
this
is
a fascinating point. That's a really interesting point. Yeah. Because when those swing states are in play, those interests count. And Colorado in the last election was a major swing state. Yeah. As it turns out, it was handily for Obama, but boy, there was a lot taken there. All right. What's wrong with the idea of, I tell you what, let's go from the abstract here. If we could wave a magic wand and the United States passed a constitution, I'll ask you if that's a better way of doing it later, and if we went to a popular vote, all right, so we have one popular election every year, or every 4 years, what's the problem?
There are 2 things, there are so many things wrong with it. Let's start with one. The system is set up so that constitutional system is set up so that the people in the smaller states, at the time, say New Hampshire, do not get, it tries to reduce how oppressed they can be by the folks from the large population centers. At the time, that would have been Pennsylvania and Virginia. That is still an important consideration today. The Electoral College system, because say Wyoming gets 3 electoral votes, because it has the 2 senators, it overweights the vote of Wyomingites compared to the vote of Californians. And that is a good thing. It's one of the things that provides some institutional protection for the people in the smaller states of Wyoming or Nebraska or Rhode Island from being oppressed by the people in the huge population centers in, say, now California, New York,
right, so
and the East Coast.
The idea here is that it is a bit more of, would it be right to say, a federalistic system, in that this means that smaller states have more say.
Yes, and it's a protection for the people in the smaller states, because in so many other ways, the mass numbers of people in those larger states can dominate the political process. So this is one of the checks and balances to give some protection to the people in the smaller states. It's also, there's an important difference between the United States of America and the single state of Colorado. The United States is a huge and very diverse country. And one of the things the Electoral College does is it provides an incentive against a candidate running up huge majorities it's a protection against sectional candidacies. So for example, that's right, George Bush, if he'd said, my goal is to win the popular vote, could have put more money into campaigning in Houston and El Paso and the places where he was going to get a lot of votes, a state he was going to carry anyway. But instead of concentrating on turning out a state that was already in support of him, he had to go and campaign in the swing states. And likewise, Al Gore, it wasn't an advantage to him to try to get more people in Los Angeles to vote for him. He had to go campaign around the country. It's an important protection against sectional candidacies. And as you see, and we need, when you elect sectional candidacies, the one time that happened, which would have happened under the popular vote system of Senator Gordon as well, was Abraham Lincoln, and we got into a civil war. We want candidates to have to campaign around the country. What the swing states are, it changes from election to election. Sometimes Utah is not a swing state one year, some in other years it has been. But we see the swing states in all the presidential elections have been geographically diverse. It's great that a Texan has to go and reach out to Florida and Iowa and New Hampshire and the other states.
But don't we have a good mixture right now? It seems as though since most of this is done, the large majority of electoral votes really come from population. That is, those popular states get a lot more electoral votes. That's why New York and California and Florida, these are the big states. And then you add 2 for the state-only factor.
Right.
So don't we already have a pretty good balance between protecting the state interest but also representing the populist interest?
I think the biggest problem with the current system is the fact that votes don't matter except in swing states. Campaigns are only in swing states. And it isn't small states that get the attention, it's swing states. In the last election, 11 of the 12 smallest states got no attention because they weren't swing states. They weren't going to Wyoming. They weren't going to Montana. They went to New Hampshire. That was a small state that got attention. But it was the only one of the 12 smallest states that did because it was swing state. So what I think it does is it overvalues the issues in certain states, and it concentrates the campaigns in certain states, and it makes it not a national election. It makes it this battleground state election. You know, it should be important. You should try to.
Isn't it? Why is it a national election? These are the United States. When you go back, we forget that it was the states that created the federal government, not the other way around, and that every state then has a say to say, all right, on the federal government, which we created, here's how all of our states.
When we started this country, there was no national media. People didn't know people from other states. They knew somebody. They said, well, I think John is a good guy. He's smart. I'm going to make him an elector, and he can try to figure out who should be president, because I don't know who they all are. Now it's the reverse. We don't know who the electors are, but we know who the candidates are who are running nationwide. So it's a different situation, and the way it was intended, it doesn't work. The framers were brilliant. What they came up with is probably the best system that has ever been devised by humans to govern ourselves, but they also agreed that African Americans couldn't vote and women couldn't vote under the original Constitution.
They did not say, there's nothing about that in the Constitution. That is purely a state issue. The United States Constitution says nothing.
Well, the
about
United States Constitution said that African
vote.
Americans counted as 3/5
for the purposes of census apportionment.
Yeah, I know. So
no, it did not say African Americans. It said slaves. It did not say African American
bondsmen, right?
It said people. I think it was people held in service. They had to come up with some euphemism to avoid saying slaves. And they also said,
what I'm saying is that
they did not say that African Americans are 3/5 of a person. They never said that, and that is a pernicious falsehood that gets spread against them.
Well, they counted as 3/5 of a person for redistricting for congressional districts. It's still a travesty that it was done.
So would you would have preferred? Now wait a second. Let's talk about this because they get libeled with this all the time. If slaves had counted as
I said something good about the framers.
if slaves had counted as a full person for House of Representatives apportionment purposes, that would have given more power in our federal government to the slave states. And the folks who were resisting it said, no, if a slave is not a civil person in your state, you shouldn't be able to get more members in the House of Representatives because you have those slaves there.
I think we're getting off on a tangent. Let me just say, the reason I brought this up is because our country's attitudes towards certain things that relate to the democratic functioning of our government has changed since the framers framed the Constitution. One of the things is that African Americans now vote, women can now vote, and those are advances towards a democratic system. And so I don't think we should say
both of those things. And both of those things were addressed, I think, in a very appropriate legal fashion by changing the Constitution through constitutional amendments.